Hey, welcome to the Hemi-Sync podcast. I'm pleased to introduce today Suresh Ramaswamy. Suresh is a transformational teacher and visionary entrepreneur passionate about igniting and catalyzing the transformation of humanity. He's the award-winning author of Just Be, Transform Your Life and Live as Infinity, available on Amazon.com. His website is sureshramaswamy.org, and his new Hemi-Sync album is called Tasting Infinity. With his background as an electrical engineer and technology executive, Suresh brings an inspired yet pragmatic approach to elevating consciousness on our planet. Held in high regard by people around the world, Suresh's light-filled presence and guidance awakens them to their innermost essence, which is what I think you'll find in this conversation as well. If you find it helpful, please share it up, and be sure to follow us on social media. Usually we're either at Hemi-Sync or at Hemi-Sync Life. And be sure to check out our Patreon page if you want to support this podcast and get some great discounts on Hemi-Sync products and services in the bargain. Enjoy. So, Suresh, thanks for joining us today. We've been kind of working on this project for quite some time. I was kind of going back and checking our correspondence, and I think the first time I heard from you was when you were actually emailing me kind of out of the blue in 2019, telling me that our app wasn't working well. You were not the first to do that. But I didn't know you at the time. And then you were introduced to me through Suzanne Giesman, who obviously is a huge Hemi-Sync creator. And you shared your book with me, which I was very moved by. And really struck by kind of your journey, which started out pretty conventional, and then, takes a turn. You kind of discuss it all in your book, but maybe if you can just kind of walk everyone through that in this conversation to kick things off, that would be a great way to start.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I've been aware of Hemi-Sync for a long time. I read Bob Monroe's books many years back and found it very fascinating how he's systematically documented things. And since then, I've come across, I know Tom Campbell mentions his work with Bob Monroe, and most recently, Suzanne. I was on Suzanne's show last year, almost around this time. Maybe it was a couple of months before March. But anyway, I love what she offers, and of course, I heard about her beautiful recordings she's done with Hemi-Sync. So anyway, that led to our, I think, interaction. In terms of my own journey, I grew up in India, and nothing particularly unusual. A middle-class family, big city. As I look back now, there's a couple of things that strike me. One is lucid dreams. I used to have spectacular lucid dreams when I was just, even before I was going to school, like 3 or 4 years old. And we're talking hours and hours of continuous lucid dreams. And interestingly, it wasn't like me playing or something like that. It was just these patterns of light. It's as if there's these spectacular hyperdimensional fields of light that I was going through. And it just kept going on and on, these colors, patterns, shapes, and I would just hang out with it. And it wasn't a passive thing. I found that I could interact with them. So I could subtly change them. And when people ask me what it was like, I think if you've seen the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, a popular science fiction movie, there, towards the end of the movie, in the climax, actually, the main character, he's going through more, hyperdimensional space. And what they show there is very similar to what I was seeing. So it was pretty cool now that I think back. And it was even now to me, I can think back exactly how it felt. So that was interesting.
So I'm curious though, like, was it clear to you that other people and that other kids were not having these types of experiences? Because I had kind of a similar journey growing up where I would have these strange experiences and I assumed everyone else was having them. and
Right.
I might like share one on the playground, and it very quickly became clear to me that
Yeah.
this was not normal. So how was
Yes.
that?
Yeah. As far as I recall, I don't think I mentioned this to
Uh,
anybody. I don't know why. I do know I was a pretty sensitive type of kid, and it felt to me like people were on a completely different wavelength.
yeah.
They were talking in stuff that was just like, that's not even interesting. And so, so I was like, okay, but so I wouldn't talk about this. As far as I recall, I didn't mention to anyone
Yeah.
until like just recent years, in fact.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, but yeah, that's just how it was. Um, Teenage years, as the next point, probably worth talking about. I was experiencing this sense of, you could say, a sense of despondency, where it felt like what I was being, what I was seeing in society, including my family, was, you just go to school, do well, get good grades, get a good job. This is the way to fulfilling life. And that totally did not make sense to me as this is the full story. It
Yeah.
felt to me like even if I do all those and get all the A pluses,
Yeah.
who cares? It doesn't
Yeah.
mean
Yeah.
anything. It doesn't mean anything. And that was kind of sad that it was like, is this it? Like, that's it. So, uh, luckily for me, I used to go to my grandparents' place every summer. And in their bookshelf, I came across this book, A Search in Secret India by Paul Brunton. And some of you might have heard of it. Paul Brunton is a British writer who, about 100 years back, he went to India and went all over the country looking for uh, and talking to holy men, mystics, strange people that you normally not don't see in the mainstream.
Hmm.
And for whatever reason, he was intrigued by this. And so he documents all these people that he met. He would ask them questions. And this was to me super fascinating. I was like devoured that book
Hmm.
uh, because for me, this is pointing at the kind of stuff I was really interested in. It really completed the picture for me that there was something much, much, much bigger than what we ordinarily run into. And also that this was something we could access in some way.
Hmm.
And there were people who were doing that. So that opened the door. And I then started reading lots of books about yoga, philosophy, books by people like Swami Vivekananda, Swami Shivananda, and also the classic autobiography of a yogi by
Hmm.
Paramahansa Yogananda.
Yogananda. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a huge source of inspiration because it just talked about the whole thing.
Yeah. That's a
Big
seminal work. I
picture.
mean, that
Yeah.
book, I think, more than any other, is what really kind of brought esotericism to the West.
Yes.
And it all took place here in LA, most of it, which is very interesting to me.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he not only shared so much, but he also it included that inspirational component, which really said, "Hey, you too can have this."
Hmm.
So that to me was a big takeaway from that. So anyway, that led to me starting to meditate, starting to discipline my body and mind, and exploring all these practices.
Hmm.
Um, and that I was like looking everywhere. So I also studied many traditions in depth. Like Buddhism was very fascinating to me, just how they talk about the mind and the mechanics of the mind.
Hmm.
Absolutely amazing. So I looked very deeply at Zen, Dzogchen, Tibetan Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism, and of course doing retreats and all the stuff.
Yeah. But you were
So
doing all of this in conjunction with living a very conventional life, right? Like you were any electrical engineer, you're a householder with kids, all of that. So like,
that's right.
did it feel like it was kind of compartmentalized? Like here was kind of your ordinary everyday, and like this other stuff was kind of over here on the side, or did
Right.
it feel integrated?
Right. So that's a great question. I would say for the most part, I was a closet mystic.
Hmm.
So outside, nobody knew that I was into these things. But for me, every spare moment I had, I knew what I was going to do. I was going to
Yeah.
be hanging out with these things. And
Yep.
so uh, it was going on side by side all the time. Outwardly, it looked like a dichotomy, like I wouldn't talk about it, but inwardly to me, it was very much part of me and part of my life. So it didn't feel like some kind of split internally. It was like, hey, this all fits together.
Hmm.
Of course, the part where there was some degree of, you could say, tension is, the outward world is always demanding more and more and more. It's
Yeah.
it's just that's the nature of it, and so you always have to pull yourself back, and you have to be very conscious how much you want to engage with certain things. So, of course, there was that kind of tension, but internally, in terms of, it didn't feel like this is two completely different things. It felt pretty integrated.
Hmm.
And of course, there's levels and levels of that. As I continued with my corporate career and later on became an entrepreneur, I continued on. And the meditation, I would summarize, a couple of decades went by. If during that time, if you'd asked me what's going on, I would basically say, not a whole lot.
Mm.
Okay. That was my predominant experience. There was not a whole lot going on.
Yeah.
Like it just felt like I was in this undefined space.
Hmm.
And I would read about other people's experiences, and they sounded pretty spectacular, unlike mine. So I figured I was just a slow poke. I mean, I was just, inching along. I had no clue. And I want to mention this because I think there might be people out there who might be feeling like nothing's happening. Well, it took a couple of decades, but then I realized there was a lot happening.
Mm.
There was a lot happening. In fact, that expansion, that incremental expansion and vibrational shift, it's an iterative process. You shift, you adjust, you shift, you adjust. And if it goes well,
Yeah.
you don't realize there's something going on.
Right.
If it doesn't go well, there's a lot of fireworks. Okay. So in fact, the experiences are mostly indicating that there's some friction in the system that is kicking up dust.
Hmm.
That dust can look like difficult emotions, or it can also look like sublime experiences. And this is like visions of amazing things. This is all internal friction.
That's an
Okay.
interesting way to think about it.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I did not think about this for a long time until anyway, much later, when suddenly something did start happening that was undeniable.
Hmm.
So I think of it as light suddenly made its presence felt in a very powerful way.
And this is the experience that you recount in the book, which took place out in the desert, correct?
That's right. That's one of the experiences I mentioned. Again, the book is mostly not about my experiences, but I sprinkled a couple here and there simply to give people a sense of, to give them a feel for light and to give them a feel that this is not just some abstract theoretical stuff, that this is real. Okay. And I wanted to, that's why I recount the experience. And yes, so that experience I talk about in the desert is representative of many, many experiences, similar ones, where it's like you're sitting there one moment and the next moment there's a significant phase shift and you are in a very, very refined state of consciousness where everything has become reduced to its more fundamental state, where everything is not just what it appears to be, but it's more irreducible intrinsic state, which is really light.
Hmm.
Everything is light. And when I say light, I want to clarify, because we do have the ordinary light that we see around us, which is part of the electromagnetic spectrum. And this is, of course, incredible itself. But the light I'm talking about is transcendental light. It's supernal light. It is not electromagnetic in nature. It is much, much more refined than that. It's several, I would say, strata beyond the ordinary physical light.
Do you think you can still describe it in terms of wavelength or vibration?
I think we fall back to using those terms simply because what else are we going to say?
What
So
else are we
we
going to
end up,
say? Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
we end up saying it's super high vibrational frequency.
Hmm.
Yes, I think it's a reasonable way to say it. And in a sense, the vibrational concept is reasonably accurate because there is an undulation in the consciousness.
Hmm.
So we're used to, like, sound is undulation of particles of air. In an ordinary light is undulation of electromagnetic waves, but this is undulation of consciousness.
Yeah.
So it is vibration. And so you could say, yes, there's some frequency wavelength types of concepts. Yes.
Hmm. So I think one of the things that struck me about your book, and I actually received quite a few books that people send to me. Never quite sure why, because I'm not a book publisher. But I do get quite a few books, and many of them either sound like, okay, I've heard this before, or they're not well written. Your book struck me because it felt like there was a transmission within the book itself, within the words, within the space between the words. And like the first maybe half of it, it sounded kind of familiar to me, which, you would expect, right? Like if it doesn't sound somewhat reflective of other great works that you've read, by various gurus or teachers, like you're probably way off the mark, right? Like there should be some commonality.
Right.
And then as I got deeper into it, I just found myself kind of sitting with it. And so like there was like an experience that opened up as I was reading the book. And so your path is interesting because the experience that you recount in the desert, where you're kind of being bathed in this light of infinity, where your consciousness is basically being entrained by this light. I think most would describe that as a transcendent experience. And people that come to Hemi-Sync are typically in search of transcendent experience, some sort of, shift in consciousness that kind of changes the paradigm so that the things that they took to be true or apparent beforehand all of a sudden get dramatically reassessed. But leading up to your transcendent experience was a long period of not much happening, which I would kind of refer to as a transformative path. So you're sitting on a cushion, meditating, maybe not much is happening, maybe you just get a sore back. And that's tough for a lot of folks. Most people will not stay on that path for 20 years. And that's where I think Hemi-Sync really helps. You can have that transcendent experience, and you can kind of see what's on the other side. But you sort of need both to have what you might call realization, right? So that you can actually embody this in your everyday life, so that you can live more freely, more easily, with a sense of liberation.
Yes.
And I think you kind of view it the same way. Is that right? Transformative versus transcendent?
Yeah, you bring up a lot of great points. So let me see where I want to start. So firstly, the book itself, which is titled Just Be, by the way, for somebody who wants to check it out, you're exactly right. It's, in fact, it was not my desire to write that book. I don't see myself as this wanting to be an author, writing fat books. So I was very much not interested. However, I was getting this push from within by the light. And it was like, write this book. And I was like, no, thank you. Because I think there's so many great books out there. I don't think we need yet another book.
Yeah.
So this went on for years until what happened was one particular moment, the intensity of light was so much. And the light conveyed to me that, look, if you write this book, this is the vibration that's going to be infused into it. And when I saw that, I was in tears because I said, this is a good reason to write the book. I mean, I'm going to write as best as I can, but the vibration is the key thing here. And that's very significant. So that's how I embarked on the book. And you're very right. It's throughout the book, while I share many, many concepts, including starting with the human-centric view of transformation, which is, life is difficult, life sucks. What can I do about it? Starting from there to more how infinity views creation, how infinity views our evolutionary journey, and how can we get there? And how can we get there without all the complexity that comes with traditional paths, which are so bogged down with so many constructs, rituals, traditions? Sometimes it's hard to distinguish between what is going to take me to the ultimate truth versus these other sort of baggage, so to speak. So that was my original reason for writing the book, to create what I felt would be just plain old English and not bogged down with anything more than needed, and something that was practical and a vibrational tool. You mentioned entrainment, which is very interesting because in my meditation experience, I found that the best way ultimately was light showing and entraining as I allowed it to, because this is our biggest, we have to play a very active role. The active role is us letting go of our limiting beliefs, constructs, conditioning, so that we can entrain all aspects of our being. At first, it is the higher aspects of our being, but eventually it's all the aspects right down to the physical. And this is where the integration comes in, because transcendence is awesome, but what happens after the meditation? Oh boy, I have to wake up Monday morning and go to work and traffic and everything else. Suddenly I'm like dropping down. If I only am relying on transcendence, which is a very uneven path. So integration would involve bringing all aspects of our being to that higher state. And then living from that place is embodiment. So I talk about these three phases: transcendence, integration, and embodiment. And I feel all these are very significant, very important for in the long run. Any given moment, we may focus more on transcendence, but very quickly we have to address everything else. So with tasting infinity, which is what we've created with Hemi-Sync technology, I think it's very exciting to me because there's Hemi-Sync, which is helping with entraining the brain and shifting it to more receptive states. But what we're doing in this particular recording is, furthermore, these sound frequencies are acting like a carrier for light frequencies.
Yes.
So these light frequencies are like higher dimensional frequencies, which are piggybacking on top of the sound carrier wave. And so what this allows us to do is short circuit the mechanisms within us, which are trying to assess, evaluate, analyze, think, understand, which all gets in the way eventually.
Yes.
It lets us go straight inside to the part of us which is light. We are actually beings of light. This is not something foreign to us. So it's like something is actuated, activated within us. And when that connection happens, it suddenly shifts our consciousness dramatically. So tasting infinity is actually, I've offered a series of retreats with that name. And what we do during the course of the retreat is go deeper and deeper. And what I've tried to do here in this recording with Hemi-Sync is package that entire thing into a shorter amount of time. So you can go as far as you want, as deep as you want, and have this real connection with light.
Yeah, so this is an action-packed exercise. Like, there is really a lot in it. And you narrate more during this exercise than we typically feature in a Hemi-Sync exercise, but I think it still works. And the reason why it still works is because, as you mentioned, the Hemi-Sync basically, takes the role of the light that you had in your personal experience in terms of the light entraining your consciousness. Here it's the Hemi-Sync kind of taking that role, the light piggybacks on it. But I think it also piggybacks on your voice, on the words that you're phrasing. And it starts to actually feel like you're hearing these words inside your own head, which is interesting. And so you start basically just by taking the listener into a relaxed state, into a, you basically tell them that, you're going to get a massage or pretend like you're getting a massage. Like, what is the importance of that relaxed state to begin with?
Yes. So I think we tend to have a lot of noise within our systems, and the noise can distract us from what is presented at a deeper level. So how do we reduce that noise? We start by relaxing the body. So the physical noise starts dropping. And as you very insightfully mentioned, there's actually a significant component in terms of the voice itself. As I'm speaking, there's a transfusion and a transference happening in that as well. And so even if somebody is not cognitively processing what I'm saying, that is perfectly fine. They are still picking up on this unspoken aspect, and that's in the voice. So physical relaxation, again, is helping us get clarity at that level of our being. And so we can more readily open up and receive.
That's a good way of putting it. I mean, I think the other observation I would make in terms of why we usually use less vocal narration is that there's a tendency for the listener to leave him or herself to go out to the words. And that's also why in the musical pieces that we produce, there's never any singing because it takes you out of your experience. But in this particular exercise, again, it feels like the voice is internalized, like you aren't leaving yourself, which is an interesting phenomenon because like that doesn't always happen. So anyway, just wanted to point that out.
Yes.
Okay, so then you kind of lead the listener through some mind taming. And so this is actually following a pretty typical Hemi-Sync progression. Like you typically get relaxed, you do some mind taming. Anyway, like how does the exercise progress from there?
Right. So one thing I want to add to that is very significant is unlike an external entity speaking to you, this is what happens here is we fuse our consciousness. It's like there's one being. There isn't a speaker who's different than the listener. It's all one consciousness. And because of that, once you relax and trust into that, and release yourself into that, then magical stuff happens. It's just amazing things happen. So we go from physical relaxation, mental relaxation to the energetic component. So the energy field, that is the subtler aspect of our being, which is kind of like the template behind our physicality. We bring coherence to the energy field. And that coherence is yet again helping us align and prepare for higher dimensional interactions. And from energy, as we ordinarily know it as subtle energy, we then go to super high energies, which is really now getting into light. So we get into the light fields where, again, we are calling forth this higher dimensional aspect of ourselves. So in fact, we invoke what I call the light of infinity. And the light of infinity is the highest frequency of light, the highest vibration within creation. So you can think of it as the very first thing that started vibrating when creation came to be. So calling upon this light is really, again, engaging with it consciously, inviting it, and receiving it. And so that entrainment process can go in a much more powerful way. And all of these things, even though we were talking about it sequentially and logically, there's a non-linear element to it. And that happens somewhere along the recording. You will suddenly find that things have shifted to you're in this very sublime, expansive space. You don't know how you got there. And there it is. It's undeniable. And if you resist the temptation to start thinking about it, you're going to keep expanding to deeper and subtler dimensions. And so the progression of the meditation is, once we're in this super expanded state, we are starting to now look at the true nature of our being, which is infinity itself. So we are now looking straight into our own essence, and we're embracing our essence. We're saying, okay, here I am, finally, shedding all these layers, all these heavy jackets and other layers. Now we're there, right there. This is a major breakthrough because we can live our entire lives and not be in this intimate encounter with our own essence. So this is fantastic because tasting infinity is, somebody might say, what is infinity? And it's a valid question. Infinity to me it is all that is. Infinity is not just creation, but what is there prior to creation. So the pure consciousness from which everything arises is infinity. And then everything that arises is also infused with that consciousness. So infinity ends up being the totality of everything, including us. We are not left out. And so, in fact, we are always part of infinity. So this is not something about getting in touch with something outside of you. It's getting in touch with the deepest part of you, which is your infinite nature. So that's where we take you in this meditation. And then, of course, we hang out there because simply hanging out in that infinity is absolutely transformative in the most amazing possible way. Because everything within you, which is less than that, is now being upgraded.
And, this kind of phrasing won't quite do it justice, but from a practical standpoint, so one of the experiences you can have here is this kind of inner knowing, or this direct pointing, I think is what you call it.
Yes.
Like a direct experience.
Yes.
Care to expand on that at all?
Yes. So I take the listener through a process where, in a very sublime, expansive state, where the mind is not functioning in its usual way, I point out step by step that here's your essence. And when you hear that, since you're in this pure, pristine state, you immediately get it. It's like, oh, it's so obvious, so simple. It's just, so that's a technique to introduce you directly to this, to your essence. And the more you can simply be, I talk about just being. So as you're in the state of just being, it's super obvious. Suddenly you're like, now I understand what all those amazing sacred texts have been telling all these years.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal. It's actually very simple and straightforward. And that's when you realize this is my natural state. This is not something from outside of me. This is natural to me. This is intrinsic to me. And in fact, you feel, I kind of knew this. I always knew this. That's the feeling you get. I always knew this thing. So, and you did, you did. It is your natural state.
And you make the point that the doorway to infinity, or kind of like the physical correlate, is a few inches below the crown of your head. So I guess that would roughly correspond to kind of the pineal gland area, maybe the pituitary, hypothalamus. And so that is also something that you see in many classic spiritual texts.
Yes.
I'm curious if you have any theories or understanding about, what it is about that area, and maybe how those organs or glands kind of work together to create this doorway.
Yeah. So it's a fascinating topic in itself, because the first thing to notice is the instrumentation to access higher consciousness is built into us, which is every one of us. So it's very important. We don't need to feel like I need something outside of me. It's built right into you. And so one of the specific places where it's literally a doorway to infinity is what has been called the third eye, and often thought of as being here in the center of the forehead. Actually, it's in an internal thing which is projected onto this part. So it's really inside the center of your head. And it turns out physiologically, as you mentioned, there's many important glands right there, and very important hormones are being produced there. But really, I look at them as first of all, they've been talked about as energy centers. And
Hmm.
yes, they are those, but I look at them as centers of light. So alongside our physical anatomy is our energy anatomy, which is a big leap. But then
Hmm.
alongside that is our light anatomy. And the light anatomy comes with its own energy centers. And so these are
Yeah.
higher frequency correlates to what we
Hmm.
might think of as the third eye energy center. The important thing is we've got the channels built in for conducting light.
Right.
And as we show up there, and I think this is the key, as we show up there, it all activates,
Hmm.
right? So we don't need to understand a whole lot about it. We don't need to understand the technical aspect of it. As soon as you show up there, it's waiting for you.
Yeah.
That is huge in terms of somebody who's a spiritual practitioner who's thinking maybe I need to do some very complex things, and who knows, I need to ingest something, I
Yeah.
need to do some very complex breathing exercises. All that I'd like to say is has its place, but really, end of the day, you show up there,
Right.
boom, things change. Things change. So yeah,
It sounds like you would agree with this idea that the consciousness itself, the light itself, is what is fundamental. Although it is true, undeniable that there are physical correlates to it, which is interesting. And like one thing that I just kind of realized recently is if you take a sagittal cut of the human head and kind of
uh-huh,
turn it sideways,
uh-huh,
that constellation of the pineal, pituitary, hypothalamus, the brainstem, it really resembles the Eye of Horus, which is, an ancient Egyptian symbol.
interesting.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting. But yeah, there
Uh-huh,
is definitely something about that area.
yes,
Cool.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found that even though I'd read a whole bunch of things, esoteric stuff about all these things,
Hmm.
when you actually show up there, it's a whole different thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you literally have to set aside every single thing you heard about or read about
Hmm.
and literally show up there because I can guarantee you it's going to be unique for you how it unfolds and how
Yeah.
you see it is going to be unique. So if you keep bringing preconceived ideas and comparing it to that, you're
Yeah.
going to actually slow down the process, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So you want to use those as inspiration, but let it go.
Yeah. And that's an important point. So all of these books, texts, even the ancient holy texts, this conversation itself, they're all
Yes.
kind of pointing you in a
Yes.
direction.
Yes.
But it's just pointing you. And like once you actually show up there, it's its own thing, and words can't really do it justice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's really important because I think we live in a time where we are pretty smart in certain ways
In
and
certain ways.
very, very sophisticated
Yeah.
in our understanding. And we've gotten carried away with our own little understanding that somehow, if I keep analyzing this further, maybe I'll
Right.
get it.
Yeah.
And of course, like everybody else, I fell for that trap too. And I want to let everybody know the sooner you can drop that, the better,
Hmm.
because your direct experience far supersedes any book you've ever read. And the more you can trust that, the better, because it'll just allow you to go there so much easier. And even as you listen to the Tasting Infinity recording, I would say set aside all preconceived notions, just see what's there. Just
Hmm.
show up clear, open, receptive, and you'll see amazing things happening.
Well, Suresh, that was a great introduction and context that you provided for this exercise. So I hope people enjoy it and derive a lot of benefit from it. And so if you like this conversation, if you have questions about it, leave us a comment. We'll try to get back to you. If it was useful, please share it up. Suresh's book, once again, is called Just Be. The exercise from Hemi-Sync is called Tasting Infinity. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.